The purpose of the talk today is just to bring you up to speed on some of the contemporary science information we've gathered, various people through the decades, for the Salmon River Delta and the floodplain. Here's a view that we don't often see, and many of us drive around the outside perimeter here, as I did for many years, not knowing what's going on here. This is very much in the middle, and we're always driving around the edge, or traveling around the edge. Science documentation and restoration and sustainable development information for a reference library and a GIS database, that's what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to bring this information together so that it's all available for the ongoing restoration and sustainable development work on the Delta that was discussed earlier this morning. I'll review some of the major physical impacts affecting the river and its delta since the railway's arrival about 127 years ago. Okay, we have quite a few studies. These are all reports. Interpretive work, in this case, primarily addressing the physical processes. I won't go into the details. I've grouped them into three separate categories. This one is more baseline data and sediment information. In other words, the river carries a lot of sediments, and various people have studied that. And they've looked at why the river is carrying all these sediments and tried to explain the processes. So there's a bunch of studies in that category. And then we also have biological, environmental, and related interpretive work. That's my field. And we have quite a few studies there as well. Then we have the enormous information that the First Nations people bring to this delta. And I, on many occasions, would ask questions of Louis and Jerry, Bonnie, and got things clarified very quickly that the science people just didn't know about. And so there's that tremendous wealth of information, of personal experience in the area. The sediment load information deals with road construction, land development, farming, forestry operations, all contributed to the sediments coming down this river. And this sediment has affected the rate of delta growth. It's noticeable. You look at the air photos, and all of a sudden, boom, it's grown. And that's abnormal. It says that there's a huge amount of material being carried. Since 1951, when ranching and farming really took off in the valley floor of the Salmon River Valley, that's when a lot of this erosion started to happen. And they figured that it's mainly the loss of streamside trees and shrubs. And here on the delta, this is one of the banks. This is the typical scenario when you bring in agriculture. The roots are just at the very surface, and yet the river erodes underneath. And so you can just see it. Here's the process. So all this material is being carried down the river constantly. Here's the same place looking the opposite direction in the spring freshet. The river's starting to overtop the levee at this point, and I put my little 2-meter pole right down next to the river here, and it's about 1.5 meters deep right there. And very dangerous along the edge of the river on these cut banks because it's being undercut constantly. This is a view many of us don't get in the spring. May is the time to go down and see the river doing its thing. Midway through May and into early June. The water is quite high. So, down closer to the railway is just on my right. This is a westward view, the main stream of the river. Same problems here. Not active agriculture, but there's no trees and shrubs established. So, and everybody knows that we've got real problems in this corner right here with erosion, active erosion. This is looking back towards Salmon Arm. The railroad is right here. And so this is the top of what we call the levee, and I'll explain what a levee is in a minute if you're not aware. So again, at this point, the levee is overtopping, so the river is actively spreading out across the floodplain. Agricultural impacts that have been directly observed up the river valley. In one case, more than 100 meters wider because of agricultural disturbance. So the river channel went from 24 meters width to 127 meters. These wider channels create shallower waters, warmer temperatures, fewer and smaller pools, less undercut bank habitat, and lower minimum flows, all of which spell trouble for the fisheries and any aquatic life in the river. All things considered, the overwhelming impact appears to be agriculture, bank erosion, where grazing and/or agricultural clearing has reduced and removed streamside trees and shrubs. The other things, other industrial processes and activities have impacted, but it appears this is the primary one. Furthermore, we get riprap placement, diking, and plowing going on elsewhere in the floodplain, where you're removing these back channels, these flood channels that meander throughout the valley, the main stream of the river, and then these side channels have also been infilled and blocked. And so when the river floods now, it can't go into these side channels. Everything stays in the main channel, more erosion. So how do you control the stream channel erosion? Well, you go back to trying to get the trees and shrubs established. That's really the only thing that can be done. This is what the river should look like. This is down the delta. Streamside vegetation, that's what it means. It regulates temperature and improves the health of the river. So between 1974 and 1990, that's this one time frame where one of our geologists did a report, and he said that there's been phenomenal growth in that time frame. Doubling, almost a doubling the size of the delta out into the lake during that time. And this is one of the diagrams that this geologist produced. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 time sequence, 6 being the youngest, 1974 to 1990, you can pretty well say to the present. What's happened is we get longshore drift, wave action carrying sediments along here and building here, but the main amount comes through here, and we've had this building out here, and this whole area here, and then also towards the wharf, there's a hole in the beach that's been deposited here. All within this 1974 to 1990 period. That's a massive amount of material. So the railway, 127 years ago, 1885, crosses at the toe of the delta, about a 2-kilometer run. And so this accelerated delta growth happened in spite of this railway. See, the railway acts a bit like a dam, and it only has 2 small outlets. Yet this delta grew while that railway was there. And so this is the sort of thing I lie awake at night in bed and I think, what is going on? Why? It shouldn't happen, but it does. So perhaps both processes are happening. There's just so much sediment coming down that river now that in spite of the constriction, only 2 small outlets, you'll see them in the next photo, there's still a massive amount of sediment getting out into the delta. So these are 2 comparison air photos, May 2010, May 1969. Have a look at, now the water level, admittedly a titch higher here, so that it'll obscure some of the material, but overall, you can see, this is the area out here. Just all of this material has just come roaring down that river. And not only is it roaring down the river, but it's also accumulating in the delta. So the river, as it comes down, goes through these different stages, and when it empties into a lake in a broad valley, much like the Salmon River Valley, you get this, what they call depositional zone. That's the final stage. The river's gradient drops right down, it's very low, and it meanders. 2 outlets only, because of this railroad crossing. One at the Salmon River, the main stem, the other at Tops Creek. And this railway is being overtopped on occasion. And of course, silting is a constant problem. A continuous settlement, so they're always having to put ballast in, lift the railway, put in more gravel because the thing keeps sinking as well. Why not put it on pylons? Why wasn't it done? Sediments are accumulating, building levees, clogging up the river channels. Sediments have accumulated upstream side of the railway, leading to an elevated floodplain. So here we have the railway, the dam. One outlet, here's the main stem of the river, there's one bridge. The other one in Hobbs Creek is over here. And all of this drainage from this valley has to find its way up to this delta. So this sediment most of it must be coming right through here. It's hard to believe. But a lot of it, I think, is staying behind. It can't make it through. And it's building up the soil, and it's expanding, and it's getting higher in there, and possibly drying out. It's really hard to say. I think that it is drying out because of that, because some of the elevated ground is higher. How do these levees form, and what is a levee? Well, here's the diagram. The river comes along like so. Sediments drop out when the water slows down, on the banks and on the bottom. And when the flood waters recede, like so, you end up with an elevated bank. And the Salmon River is that. When you go down there, just look for that, and it's very obvious in certain places. So it channelizes to a certain extent, that the river stays within these channels, but when it overtops, it sends sediment out across the floodplain. And the other thing that happens is, as the river approaches this railway, the gradient drops right off. Like maybe we have a 3 or 4% gradient here, and it turns to almost nothing here. And at this point, the river is just wondering, where is this lake? And it's going around, and you look at it, and you think, oh my God, look at this tortuous pathway. And it turns out that the lake, actually, the real true lakeshore is not this railroad, it's here. It comes right up like so, and in here, and over here like that. That's Switzmalph Lake's margin in the delta area. And so, when the river comes down, it encounters the edge of the lake, the gradient drops right off, almost zero slope. And so, some of this convolution is because of that slope, gradient dropping off, but the geologist also believes that some of that is because of the constricted only one outlet, major outlet on the railway. So the river is really having trouble trying to figure it out. And it's carrying a lot of sediment with it. So impacts on vegetation and fisheries, absolutely. Enormous impacts, and it's another whole field. A lot more to say about that, but the fisheries impact has been acknowledged time and time again because of the sediment clogging up the river. I talked with Bonnie about this. The deep channels that once existed in the Salmon River just aren't there anymore. Everything is full of sand and silt, and so you know it's the fish habitat has really been affected by all the sediment load. Oh, and just one other quick thing. Going back to this diagram, Warren and I were discussing this. You look at the river here, it's fairly straight as it has a gradient, right? It turns into this convoluted pathway here. And as soon as it gets past the railway, it straightens out again. Okay, the other thing that one of the studies looks at is what's called, it's the dynamics of a river channel. And so we have real issues with trying to understand and describe this. And ultimately what you want to do is stay off of the floodplain because they are quite unpredictable. One of the terms they use is channel migration, channel avulsion. And depending on various factors, the avulsion causes an old channel just to be abandoned. So the river now jumps to a new channel. And it can happen apparently instantaneously, or it will take place over the course of a while, time, years perhaps. And this is the process here. Here's the original channel, and then we get the beginning of the avulsion process, and then there's your new channel. Development on active deltas of wetlands typically requires armoring, diking, dredging, all kinds of expensive taxpayer costs, by the way. Not the developers. We are the ones who end up covering provincial government, local governments. Hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of dollars. All we need to do is look south towards Vernon, BX Creek. Apparently, 800 to $1 million in gas tax revenue was used to dredge the stream recently. And it was announced by our federal MP as some sort of a very positive project, a trail building project. I look at it as a disaster. Money wasted because of building on floodplains. And we'll have a closer look here. Here you see they've tried to channelize this BX Creek, which by the way drains Silver Star, and then it flows along the edge behind the new shopping center at the north end of Vernon, and it comes out there underneath the highway. It looks like a small creek, but when it floods, it's got lots of power. Here it is again. I'm standing on a trail that goes along one side, the east side, looking to the west side. Now look at this house, right here. They've got a deck right here. And I mean, they're on right next to the river. And the city allowed this to go ahead. And here, this is the back of the shopping center, Walmart. And here's the Taifa cattail marsh here. The whole place, that whole northern part of Vernon is all blue-listed cattail marsh until very recently. 5 minutes, okay. more than 95% of the wetlands in the Okanagan, we managed to get rid of them one way or another, just since the 1920s or so. Soils. We have good soils information. Here's the highway, different soil polygons drawn here, and here's the Salmon River flowing through here. Most of these soils very wet, predictably, full of silt, and very rich soils for agriculture. The only limiting factor, water. So if we can drain a little bit, then of course the soil is much more productive. Nevertheless, even as it is, very productive soils. And in this area, slightly drier soil up here. The N here in this soil is, I'll give you the names of these soils. They're named actually. The Apollimar, the Carlin, the Mabel, the Sconlith, the Rumball, the Tappan, Wallenstein. I'm sure some of you will recognize those as family names or names of creeks. Only one of them, First Nations reference, as far as I can see. So the soils are very silty, a little bit of clay. It turns out that water carries the clay very easily. And so there's really not much clay accumulation on the delta. It finds its way out into the lake. For clay to settle out in water, roughly 24 hours, and absolutely calm water, and then the clay will finally settle out. So the fines that are settling out in the delta are mainly sands and silts when the flood waters come down. This is what it looks like. This is the alluvial soil next to the river, fresh sand deposit. And here's a little bit further away from the stream channel. This is this rich soil along the river on the delta. And these little lumps here, these are all earthworm casts, because the place is just full of earthworms. And you can't even see the layering in the soil, in spite of the fact that the soil was laid down by a river, layer after layer after layer. You don't see any layering because the earthworms are completely mixing it. So the soil is not even described as a layered soil anymore. They don't even mention it. They don't say why, but I'm telling you why. Actively flooded. And how actively flooded is this river? This floodplain. Here it is in action. Channel full, and it's streaming over the edge. And one of our sources, invaluable source on the web, has been Environment Canada's hydrometric station. There's a word for you. Salmon River near Salmon Arm, BC, and there's the site. Fabulous amount of information. Here's a graph, 39-year period, and every year, this is the height of the high water in volume. So we're going from, say, 16 cubic meters per second in 2004 was the high, right up to 61 or so, 62 almost, in 1997. So I've just arranged them in order of increasing or decreasing. This is the point. Once that's above 36 cubic meters per second, it starts to overflow its banks. So half of that time period, look at that, up to here, of these years, the last 39 years, pretty much every second year, it's overtopping its banks. And this is the 1 in 5 year. It's a much bigger flood at 43 to 44 cubic meters per second. LiDAR data, something collected by the city in 2010. Very interesting stuff. We have that for the Delta, for the whole Salmon Arm area actually. Uses a laser beam from low-flying aircraft, and it collects huge amount of highly detailed information and creates digital elevation models. And there's many other practical applications for a whole lot of uses, including anthropological studies. There's a tremendous amount of applications. What do these maps look like? Here's an example. This one, here you can see the railway going through here, and there's the river. Now look at the detail. What's happened is, it's collecting, the map has produced the point where the laser beam goes, the furthest point, okay? That's what's shown here, the furthest point. So it shows the actual lowest point of ground. Trees gone, vegetation gone. Isn't that incredible? So we have that data, and I think it's going to be very valuable for future work on the Delta. This is another version of that map. And if you look carefully, this orange line here, just to show you the kind of sophisticated information, that's the 348.7 meter contour, which is the 5-year flood for the lake. You can do that sort of thing with data. Flash of instruction to the computer. Here, can you see these little specks right here? Those are the pit houses. Yeah. So if you go on next Sunday's trip out onto the Delta, the gathering, traditional gathering, that's where we'll be, I'm sure. Spend most of our time there. Here's another version of a map you can produce. This one shows elevational gradients on a highly detailed ortho-corrected map. So this is all part of this LiDAR data. Biological diversity. I think it's one of the hot spots in southern BC. 1 minute? Less than a minute.
Less.
Okay, folks. To be continued. Anyway, the thing that I think, in terms of what is happening on the Delta, the important work, habitat loss and degradation needs to be addressed, and then invasive species need to be addressed. And I think that's part of the restoration of the Delta. All of these factors, climate change, pollution, overexploitation, and these other two factors are all contributing to the loss of biodiversity in this incredible Delta. Thank you.